Welcome to this Q&A. I suspect a lot of this will be dominated by the war between Israel and Iran. Um, uh, I would say there are, many, probably more questions than there are answers about capabilities. Um, and I think most of the questions tend to focus on that. So we'll start. This is from Kevin Quads. This being a completely different political climate than the aftermath of 9/11, where trust in institutions has totally collapsed, you have to imagine that the vast majority of the public will not be on board for a war with Iran. Does this make a difference? How can they possibly wage this war when nearly the entire population is opposed to it? The big question is whether Iran will strike American military bases or targets in the region, or ships and American shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. I think at that point, the Trump administration could certainly sell a war to the American public. I suspect that Iran is very reticent to do this. It does not want to draw the United States into the conflict. Of course, Israel's goal is to draw the United States into the conflict. They can't take out the nuclear facilities in Fardo, which are deep underground, without U.S. bunker buster bombs. Those things are 14 tons. They don't have the capacity to deliver those. They don't have the bombers that can deliver them. And then there is the other problem, and that is that the air defense systems, the THAADs, the Iron Dome, all this, they're going to run out of these things. I mean, that's the big question for all of us. Is it's generally been assumed that Iran had about 2,000 ballistic missiles. Israel's surprise attack, Iran was unprepared for that attack on Friday, certainly targeted missile sites, targeted air defense systems. How much damage was done, we don't know. How many missiles are left, we don't know. But if Iran can continue to, and they're firing off these volleys of 100, 200 ballistic missiles, if they can continue to do this over a period of time, Israel's capacity to resist or to intercept these missiles is going to become more and more degraded and more difficult. The other question, of course, we have, and again, we don't know, is to what extent Iran has damaged oil production facilities in Haifa. The Ben Gurion airport reports that Israeli planes are operating on British airfields out of Cyprus. These would all seem to indicate that perhaps the damage that Iran has inflicted is more severe than the Israelis are acknowledging. This is Visi. Kevin King. You've been reporting that Iran has superior anti-air Russian weaponry, yet the Zionist bombs have been getting through seemingly easily into Iran. Please clarify. So the Iranian Air Force is negligible. I mean, you haven't seen its appearance. Many of the fighter jets are decades old, some dating to the reign of the Shah, who, of course, was overthrown in 79. They do have a Russian and Chinese air defense systems, and it's generally been assumed that they were really, at least effective in terms of protecting Iran. They have not, as far as we know, they have not shot down any Israeli planes. Israel is claiming, and it certainly appears that it's probably correct, that Israel has complete dominance over Tehran. So that is the question. Were they able in that attack with it? We know they targeted the air defense systems. Were they able to take them out, or were they just not as good as we thought they were? Again, those are unanswerable questions, or certainly at this point. But yes, it was assumed that the air defense capabilities of Iran were better, but they've largely, of course, proved ineffective, either because they've been destroyed or because they weren't as good as we thought they were. R. Dougherty, if what happens to Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon in January 2006 also happened to Trump today, if Trump was in a coma, would the U.S. experience a governing crisis that would affect it in the world? Well, I mean, as soon as Ariel Sharon had his stroke and fell into a coma, he was replaced, so he wasn't governing. I mean, if anything happened to Trump, you'd get Vance, probably more dangerous because he has a brain. So I don't see how, and ultimately, the American political class in both parties is owned by the Israel lobby, especially Congress. Israel does what it wants with impunity. I think much of the uh, postings by Trump on his social media platform, it kind of smells to me of the typical bragging that Trump engages in, that he gave them 60 days and that they better negotiate now. The Pentagon has long resisted Israel's attempt to drag the United States into a war with Iran. This goes all the way back to the first Bush administration. In fact, when in between, after the elections, before Obama's inauguration, there was a huge push by Israel in that interim to carry out a bombing campaign against Iran, which the United States resisted. Um, for many reasons. You're just not going to subdue Iran, I mean, through aerial bombardment. And ultimately, you'd have to occupy the country. Iran is uh, a huge country. It's the 17th largest country in the world, the size of Western Europe, has a population of 90 million. That's 10 times the population of Israel. Israel, I think, not surprisingly, in the initial waves, is able to inflict damage, but a long-term war of attrition, especially if Iran can replenish its ballistic missile supplies, and one would assume that Russia, which is allied with Iran, would facilitate that. Then Israel could begin to be punished significantly. Um, but those again are unknowns. This is Visi. Should Iran strike American military bases? In other words, will restraint help Iran's goal in deterring Israel, or is a madman maximalist strategy more likely to grant Iran success in defending themselves from Western power? I think that if Iran struck American bases, and they're dotted throughout the region, this would very clearly draw the United States into the conflict. I don't think that would be good for Iran. Um, uh, so my guess is that Iran will kind of do everything possible not to, although, the Iranian leadership, of course, has probably correctly accused the United States of complicity in these strikes and collusion with Israel in these strikes. If they haven't actively participated, they've certainly participated, probably in terms of intelligence, in terms of weapon supplies and everything else. But my guess is that Iran will really try to avoid provoking a conflict with the United States. Laura Vitorosio, what are your thoughts on the No Kings rallies? I don't see many or any young people, mostly boomers, and I don't see signs protesting the genocide at these rallies. Well, we live in a system that this predates Trump, but has certainly been accelerated under the Trump administration, where the consent of the governed is meaningless. They don't really care what we think. Most people don't want to see Social Security destroyed. Most people don't want to see veterans benefits privatized. Most people would like big banks held accountable. Most people don't want the oligarchs and the billionaire class to engage in virtual tax boycotts. But it doesn't matter. And I think that for rallies like this, it's largely, in terms of actually influencing or pressuring the Trump administration, useless. What is not useless is what we saw in Los Angeles, where you actually begin to shut down highways and you disrupt the machinery of state. And of course, the state the Trump administration has responded with very draconian measures to thwart that. But I think it's acts of civil disobedience, acts of disruption that will be effective in putting pressure on the Trump administration, but not. I mean, I think it's great that people went out. That's better than not going out. But I don't think ultimately the Trump administration cares how many people are protesting, as long as they don't begin to disrupt the mechanisms of governance and commerce. PFS, how do we capitalize on the momentum from the No Kings rally? Well, I think that would be the way to capitalize it. Ultimately, we have to organize strikes. That is the most effective weapon we have. Of course, organized labor has been decimated, so it's almost a rebuilding process. This is what Shama Sawant is trying to do with No Worker Strike Back. But the power we have, or the collective power we have, is expressed primarily through the strike, which is why since, let's say, the early 70s, the billionaire class, the business community, the corporatists have worked so hard to disempower the American worker and strip from them the ability to organize and to strike. Otto Carnage is Israel Moloch. Moloch, for those who don't know, is the Hebrew Bible monster, of Canaanite, I believe, who demands child sacrifice. Well, I would say the war industry is Moloch, without question. Israel is an integral part of that, or a cog in that global war industry, without question. Baby Ethernet, Israel's action in Gaza, Iran are undeniable acts of terror, and the average American doesn't support more war. Is a more extreme government crackdown on freedom of speech inevitable or possible, with or without the war in Iran? I think we're moving towards a more extreme suppression of free speech. The trajectory is clear. The kind of these incremental steps, watching ICE in masks, with in unmarked cars, snatching people with legal residence off the streets of American cities, watching the Trump administration defy court orders because the Department of Justice refuses to enforce court orders. All of the moves are bringing us closer and closer to an authoritarian state. And of course, what frightens me is that I don't see any impediment to it. I don't see anything to stop it. The Democratic Party is a corpse. I mean, they're all sitting around thinking it's about messaging. I think that what we've seen, of course, under the guise of anti-Semitism, is essentially this complete suppression of free speech, not only on university campuses, which is almost complete, and every campus is complicit in this, but just the way people have been purged from any kind of public platform if they name the genocide as genocide, or name the apartheid state of Israel as an apartheid state. LB, I'm looking to go to law school, and I was wondering if you had an inkling as to what area of law might be good for helping working class people. Well, I mean, the public defender's office, such as it exists, their case burdens, or they're so overloaded they can't usually do adequate defense. But huge segments of our society, undocumented workers, the working poor, those people who are incarcerated. Remember that 94% of the people in our prison system, they never had a jury trial. They're coerced, and I use the word coercion because it's the best way to describe what happens in this system. They're coerced into accepting pleas. How does that work? Well, the prosecutor will stack all sorts of charges against the defendant, fully understanding that a significant number of those charges did not take place. In New Jersey, with my students in the prison, they always like to slap kidnapping on there because it's 25 years, and then they bargain with the public defender's office. Well, we'll remove this, remove that, if you plea. Or another way to pressure people is they keep them in a county jail. I mean, I've had people kept in county jails for up to 2 years, and county jails are just awful. There's no movement there. I mean, prison looks like, by the time they get there, compared to a county jail, a Holiday Inn or something. They'll keep them locked in a county jail until finally they agree to plea. The court system would collapse without plea deals. So there's certainly many people in deep need of adequate legal representation, and they don't get it. It doesn't pay very well, but at least it's an honest way to make a living. Christian Herrera, I'm really pissed off that Americans have the attention span of goldfishes and are forgetting Iraq. This is making me feel disillusioned with all my loved ones. How do I handle this? Yeah, I mean, historical amnesia is rife within the American empire. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. And that is really the fault of the media. Even at the end of the Afghan war, when it was clear it wasn't going well, it disappeared. I mean, it disappeared from the media landscape. So I wouldn't so much fault your relatives as I would fault a bankrupt press that never puts anything in context and is just an echo chamber for the power elites. I mean, all of the people trotted out on these cable shows to comment about war are people who come from the war industry or come from the intelligence community, and usually are sitting on the boards of Raytheon or something, collecting $500,000 a year or whatever it is they collect. So I think that I would blame much of what's happening on the degradation of the media. Athletically smart. Do you think it's possible that the U.S., Israel, NATO, and Gulf states coalition could attack Iran not only through the air, but through their proxies in the region, ISIS, Al-Qaeda on the ground, similar to Syria and Libya? No, because of the size of Iran and the size of the Iranian military. I think the only way to attack Iran would be to deploy, I've heard estimates, they would need a minimum of 1 million troops. That would go ultimately as well as the occupation of Afghanistan or Iraq went. I think that they have fooled themselves into thinking that they can accomplish what they want to accomplish simply through aerial attacks. And I think if anything is exposed the kind of inability of air power to achieve these goals, it would be countries like Afghanistan or countries like Iraq, where even though, of course, we did have occupation forces, it was this heavy reliance on air power that finally just did not blunt these insurgencies. And I think the same would be true in Iran. I don't think that the Iranian regime is going to be subdued by aerial assaults, and I don't think it would ultimately be subdued by an occupation. I think that would be just utterly disastrous. I'm not sure if anyone has thought out where this is going to go in the long term. I don't sense that Israel has any long-term plan. So, this would just be yet another fiasco, a military fiasco engaged in by a dying empire. Visi, does the American lobby control America, as many theorize, or is the Israel lobby an extension of Western capital that extends itself into American politics, just as other industries do? No, the Israel lobby does control American politics, because we live in a system of legalized bribery. I mean, our politicians dance to the tune of the highest bidder, and the Israel lobby or the Zionists have a lot of money and they use it. So is it also it's also tied into the neoconservative project. It's also, of course, tied into the weapons industry, because the more war, the more money these people make. So there are sort of interlocking interests that combine to perpetuate the goals of the neoconservatives. I mean, the war industry funds all these neoconservative think tanks, the Heritage Foundation, all this kind of stuff, because it doesn't matter how wrong they are. People like Robert Kagan and all these figures, they're always calling for war, which the weapons industry wants because it makes them money. Eric McCormick, why are the world's governments collectively ignoring the multitude of African conflicts ongoing right now, thinking of the Sudan and Congo? Well, it's called oil. And the concern about conflicts is directly related to the economic interests of outside powers like the United States. I mean, Congo is, of course, extremely rich in resources, uh, rare earth minerals and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I think that the deep concern over what's happening in the Middle East is driven by uh, the petrochemical industry that is so vital to sustain the global economy. Rose and Malone, if Trump gave them 60 days, why was the U.S. supposed to be meeting the Iranians on Sunday? That was after 60 days. Who knows? I mean, be careful about Trump. I think my guess is that he kind of wants to take credit for the Israeli strike as exposing his iron fist policy. So, I mean, that's the tragedy, is that the only way out of this is a negotiated settlement with the Iranians, but it goes back to Trump's first administration, when he, although Iran was not in violation of the nuclear agreement, Trump just decided to rip it up and invalidate it. Faluso, Iran spends seconds away from a nuke since the 80s. What's Israel's real objective with this escalation? I think that there are three objectives that Israel has. The reconfiguration of the Middle East after the invasion of Iraq. I mean, everything went wrong. So if you go back to the invasion of Iraq, the neoconservatives, and this was an Israel project. I mean, the Israelis and the neoconservatives were the driving factors between the invasion of Iraq. Why? Because Saddam Hussein was a major regional power that Israel correctly saw as hostile to the Israeli state. And so they wanted to break it. And they bought into this fantasy that Western democracy would be implanted in Baghdad and emanate outwards across the Middle East, in particular to Iran. That, remember, the oil revenues would pay for the reconstruction, that we would be greeted as liberators. I mean, all of this was non-reality based, as I speak as someone who spent significant time in Iraq. And every single project they have engaged in, whether that's Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, or Iraq, has been a catastrophic failure. And what they actually did is upset the power balance. So you had Iraq was a counterweight to Iran. But what we've done is essentially, because Iraq is primarily Shia, about 60% Shia, Iran is a Shia, of course, dominated country. What we did is create an alliance between a Shiite-dominated government in Baghdad and a Shiite government in Tehran. And I think that these people have never accepted their own failures, and so they've demonized Iran. It's Iran's fault. So if we get rid of Iran, if we break Iran, then the mess that we created will somehow be resolved. I think that's part of what's happening. I think also in terms of Israel, it wants to destroy. As far as we know, Iran does not have a bomb or even a nuclear weapons program. It has fissile material that probably very quickly could be made into a bomb. It would like to destroy the capacity of Iran to produce a nuclear weapon, but that will only happen if the main facility in Fardo is obliterated, and Israel just doesn't have the ordnance to do it. It needs the United States to do it. But I think we also can't underestimate what's happening in Gaza. So that you have had a complete blockage of food and humanitarian aid since March 2nd. Over 500,000 Palestinians are starving. Israel very cynically has created these aid hubs. Nobody argues that they're handing out enough food parcels or there are enough aid hubs to feed the population of Gaza, but they're luring, because they're all in the south along the 9-mile border with Egypt. They're luring desperate, hungry Palestinians. And of course, when people riot because there isn't enough food, shooting significant numbers, I mean, often dozens a day, killing them. But they're luring them to the south to empty the north, to create contained areas in the south. As the starvation becomes more acute, this is complete speculation at this point. I mean, the goal is to deport them, to drive them out of Gaza. That 9-mile stretch of border between Gaza and Egypt is fairly porous. I mean, I've been on it. It's in parts of it's only a fence. It wouldn't be hard to breach that fence, despite Egypt's protestations that this is unacceptable, and essentially push the Palestinians into the Egyptian Sinai, the northern Sinai. I mean, that would have ramifications not only domestically within Egypt, but throughout the region. But I think Israeli hubris is kind of unassailable at this point. I also am well aware of how Israelis, having lived in Israel, speak and talk about Arabs or Egyptians, with a pretty heavy undercurrent, and not always an undercurrent, of racism and disdain. I mean, maybe it'll happen some other way, but clearly we're moving towards the last chapter of the genocide. The Palestinians can't sustain much more. Not only do they not have food, they don't have access to medicine, they don't have fuel. So you have, I think, 53, the Palestinian Red Crescent has 53 emergency vehicles. Most of them are not running because they don't have any gas. They don't have any fuel. 90% of the Palestinian population is displaced, living out in the open or under crude tarps or amid the rubble. There's no clean water. The last desalination plant isn't running. They've cut off internet, so you can't even get images out. So yeah, we know where this is headed, and the conflict with Iran has certainly diverted the world's attention, and I think Israel will very cynically use that diversion to accelerate the genocide within Gaza. I mean, the worst ethnic cleansing campaigns for the Palestinians occurred during war. 1948, the war that saw the creation of the State of Israel, saw 750,000 Palestinians driven from their homes, along with several massacres, of course, Deir Yassin and others. And then in the 1967 war, you had another 350,000 Palestinians driven out, displaced from historic Palestine. And then in between these conflicts, you have this kind of slow motion ethnic cleansing. Since October 7th, of course, it's not just been Gaza. In the West Bank, some 40,000 Palestinians have been displaced from their homes. Israel has seized more and more land within the West Bank. Has just handed out 10,000 automatic weapons to Jewish colonists who have formed rogue militias to terrorize Palestinians and often killing them. And Israel just essentially, with the conflict with Iran, did a complete closure or seizure of the West Bank. So I think most of us feel that if Israel gets away with depopulating or ethnically cleansing Gaza, they won't stop. They will then turn around and go on the West Bank. And war is always a cover, always a time of the largest expulsions that Palestinians have faced have always come during wartime. This is Alexis. If the Axios reports are true that Trump was working with Israel to feign disagreement with Israel in the peace talks in order to aid Israel's attack on Iran, aren't Americans already involved? If so, why should Iran exercise restraint? Well, Iran should exercise restraint because it is not wise for them to provoke the United States into joining Israel in this uh, campaign of, especially this aerial campaign. That's number one. Number two, you can't trust anything Trump says. Did the Trump White House know about it? Well, certainly. But Bibi Netanyahu and the Israeli government have a habit of making decisions, informing the U.S. Uh, and then carrying it out, whether the U.S. wants it or not. Um, so I think Trump is. I suspect. I mean, maybe he was involved, but I suspect that Trump is essentially using this conflict to, inflate his own political capital. He is still talking about negotiations. That this will. I don't know if that will work, but he's talking about still bringing the Iranians to a negotiated settlement. But again, that's speculation. Aisha Suja, can you please address the role of AI predictive warfare? Israel and Saudi Arabia have invested trillions in developing AI to inform their every system and every move. Well, we've seen it in Gaza. So AI selects the targets. They use electronic monitoring of phones and everything else. They collect databases, and in fact, the AI is selecting so many targets that Israel can't keep up with the selected targets. So that's just an example of how AI can be used to carry out targeted assassinations, and has been used to carry out targeted assassinations now for the 20 months of the genocide. Aaron Humbert, how can a coalition of those on the anti-war left and the anti-war right be created? Are there existing organizations that are worthy of support? What charities do you recommend supporting that provide aid to Gaza? Well, Veterans for Peace, they're not on the right, but Veterans for Peace has done great stuff. Code Pink. So there are, good anti-war organizations. I mean, the ones that are organized do, as far as I know, tend to be left wing. But they, as long as you're standing up against the war, I don't think they're kind of vetting you in terms of other, or I would hope they're not vetting you in terms of other political, vetting you in terms of your political orientation. I mean, that would certainly be very short-sighted. So, Gestoris Panama, how does an Iran war not endanger all Gulf states, and why don't they do anything to stop this through oil leverage? Well, Saudi Arabia has issued a statement that it opposes the war. It does endanger Gulf states because most of them have U.S. bases, including Saudi Arabia. And should the United States, although all of the Gulf states have said that should the United States go to war with Iran, they will not be able to, or not be permitted to, carry out aggressive activities from their military bases. Yeah, of course, a regional war. I mean, let's say this war spreads. Let's say the United States gets involved. There's certainly significant parts of the Middle East, especially among the Shia, who are going to see this as a kind of religious war. Saudi Arabia has 2 million Shiites, and many in the oil-rich region of Saudi Arabia. Iraq, as I mentioned before, is predominantly Shia. Bahrain, Pakistan, Turkey, they all have significant Shiite populations. So should this conflagration become regional, it will very much certainly disrupt the economies, because so much of the oil is shipped out through that narrow 33-kilometer Strait of Hormuz. But then internally, I mean, these populations will become very restive. Mika Bear, do you think Iran could devastate Israel militarily? Do you think they will negotiate with Israel or stand their ground? If they stand their ground, will it help encourage the region, help the Palestinians? I mean, the interesting thing about Iran is they've never wanted a war. Even when Israel carried out those strikes in April of 2024, where they attacked the embassy in Damascus and killed senior Iranian figures, the response of the uh, Iranian government was this kind of, almost choreographed fleet of drones, which were announced in advance, and most of which were shot down over Jordan or Israel. I think maybe there was one Israeli was injured or killed. But so they were forced to respond, but the response was almost symbolic. Iran just does not want to go to war, and that's kind of the tragedy of where we are. I mean, this time is different, and the question is, what are the stockpiles of ballistic missiles? That's number one that Iran has. How much of that missile stockpile and production was disrupted by the Israeli strikes, and they were clearly targeted on Friday. And then the second is, what are, as I mentioned before, Israel's defensive capabilities? At what point do they begin to run out of munitions, interceptors, and the Iron Dome and the THAADs and everything else, and those stockpiles are finite? We can't answer those questions. Potentially, if Israel's air defenses are degraded, and every day this goes on, they become more degraded, and Iran can continue to draw on significant stockpiles of ballistic missiles, then Israel is going to take harder and harder hits and suffer more and more damage. Thoughts on the 50501 protests? I was out in the streets this weekend, but I feel like we don't have enough protests, and the support for a general strike isn't at the level it should be. Yeah, it's not. I mean, getting out and protesting is good, because I think it begins a process of hopefully radicalization where people begin to understand, when they confront centers of power, exactly how those centers of power work. So I think the protests are good, but I think you're right that we have to begin to adopt the kind of militancy which we have seen in some neighborhoods in Los Angeles, where people have really organized to try and keep ICE out completely. But it's got to be proactive like that if we have any hope of disrupting this rapidly emergent authoritarian state. Reverend Edmund Bolela, do you see an American involved war in Iran as undermining Trump's MAGA support? They did not vote for this. Also, isn't the No Kings movement just kabuki theater? Well, I wouldn't be that tough on the No Kings movement, but I think we've got to go way beyond it. Yeah, I mean, but he of course, Trump's betraying the MAGA base over the war, which most of them don't want. But he's already betrayed them. I remember Hispanics voted for him. He said, we're going to deport criminals and this kind of stuff. Well, now he's deporting these poor workers who line up for day labor outside of Home Depots and that kind of stuff. So he's slashing Medicare. He's going after Social Security. I mean, he's just betraying his base right and left. Pell Grants. I mean, it's kind of an endless list, but that's what authoritarian states do, because what they've essentially done is disempower the population. The population has absolutely no say in how they're governed. Leanna, what do you see as the primary motivator of these continuous wars and regime changes? Stealing and controlling lucrative oil and resources, making billions in profits from the sales of weapons, surveillance technologies, and intel, or something else? Who are the main profiteers? The entities behind the ever-morphing political party, personality, circus curtain. We are clearly in the realm of addiction, including the addiction to cruelty, and have left rationality far behind. Yeah, I of course agree with all that. Well, look, war is a business, a pretty lucrative business. When the war in Afghanistan ended in humiliating defeat for the United States, the stock prices of the weapons manufacturers cratered. And then they got Ukraine. Perpetual war is very, very good for business. And, I think much of the engine driving this, because of course these think tanks are all, as I mentioned, funded by the war industry, is the perpetual conflict. Perpetual conflict means astronomical profits. So I mean that's huge. Uh, Israeli dominance throughout the region Israel is expanding Greater Israel. It's moved into southern Lebanon. It's seized huge parts of Syria. I mean, really almost right up to Damascus. It intends to turn Gaza into a Jewish colony. The dream of Greater Israel is driving this. The evisceration of the Syria. Remember, Syria was the conduit from Iran to Hezbollah. The Bashar al-Assad regime, however brutal it was, and it was brutal, uh, stood up on behalf of the Palestinians, defied the United States, defied Israel. And then, as soon as Bashar al Assad was overthrown, you had a series of military strikes to essentially cripple Syria's military capacity completely. Hezbollah was decapitated in Lebanon through pagers, and Israel has had a series of very successful hits on its traditional enemies. I mean, Hamas is still holding on somehow, uh, and I think that kind of Israeli hubris and overreach has led to these attacks on Iran. um, Max, Trump has ordered everyone in Iran to immediately evacuate. Uh, well, yeah, I mean, many people are already evacuating Iran. Of course, the roads are clogged out of the city. I don't know that Trump's comment means there's something catastrophic that's imminent. But certainly Israel has been striking pretty indiscriminately in Tehran. I mean, apartment buildings with large numbers of dead, including children. So, uh, um, I think again, this is kind of Trump's, uh, hyper masculine posturing, which he does. But I'm not sure that it means we're that something other than we're already seeing, which are significant and indiscriminate airstrikes by Israel, including, of course, against the television station, the Iranian state TV. Uh, I think it's probably going to be more of the same. Rose and Malone, dock workers in different European countries recently refused to load arms bound for Israel. Is anything like this possible in the U.S.? Well, I think that's absolutely vital. That's the kind of message that works. And it's clear that the two ruling parties have absolutely no interest in halting this genocide. It's up to us. And, one of the most effective mechanisms is, of course, not loading arms bound for Israel onto ships, weapon systems, and also protesting outside of the way the UK protesters do outside of Elbit systems, to name and call out the weapons manufacturers that are shipping weapons to sustain the genocide. Because at this point, about 70% of the munitions that Israel uses, they've depleted their own stocks, come from the United States. R. Dougherty, what is your opinion of Trump's military parade? Is it a sign of decline of empire? Did you see the squeaky tanks? Did the troops want this? Well, it's this is just the classic trope of the authoritarian leader who sees the U.S. military as a projection of his own personal strength. I mean, it was not many people showed up. It wasn't even much of a military parade if you compare it to, something in Red Square or even the Bastille Day parade. But this is just kind of de rigueur for dictators and authoritarian figures who want to essentially use the military as a way to project their personal power. KDK, Chris, are you aware of churches that have started to come around from their stupor about Palestine, a movement among churches of any kind to resist the genocide? Some denominations have. Actually, I'm Presbyterian. The Presbyterian Church has been fairly good on this. The problem is the church just doesn't have any social capital anymore. It's in steep decline, and that's a whole nother broadcast. And so they just don't have any real clout or reach. I mean, you had to admire Pope Francis for at Christmas wrapping in the creche the infant Jesus, the figure of the infant Jesus in a keffiyeh. Um, uh, but the church is a dying institution. I spent my life tethered to two dying institutions, the press and the church. Liam, what do you think the chances are that the U.S. is fighting a three-front war, Russia, Iran, and China by next year? I don't see the United States going to war with Russia. The aggressive posturing towards China, which predates, of course, the Trump administration, continues. What will happen over Taiwan, that is the flashpoint. The militarization or the heavy U.S. presence, naval presence in the South China Sea, that predates Trump. Certainly very aggressive posturing towards China. But I don't think we're quite there yet for something which is a world war. Chantus 27, what are your thoughts on the Democratic Party? Do you feel this is a mask off uniparty movement to the American people? What do you think of the progressive movement like the Zoran in the NYC mayor race? The Democratic Party is a corpse. It has absolutely no idea what to do other than have swanky weddings and soirees in the Hamptons for the Clintons and George Soros' son and the biggest funder of the Democrat. One of them shows up and they all sit around and drink cocktails. They think it's a matter of messaging. They're completely checked out. I mean, that's how they ran this vapid, issueless, celebrity-driven campaign around Harris. And they've proven they have no capacity to resist. I mean, what's their approval rating? 27% or something. So now the Democratic Party is in free fall and deserves to be in free fall. But unfortunately, that's left us without a viable political opposition. To the extent that independents can begin to run and fill the void left by the Democratic Party, great. But we're a long way from reaching a point where that political mass can serve as a counterweight. IAD, under what conditions might Egypt unilaterally open the Rafah crossing with Gaza without coordination with Israel, the U.S.? Well, I just came back from Egypt. I'm doing a book, I'll have to disappear for the next few months with the cartoonist Joe Sacco on the genocide in Gaza. We interviewed large numbers of Palestinians from Gaza, and I'll tell you, it was really, not only were the stories just as horrific as you'd expect, but it was very clear in interview after interview after interview that every single family was devastated. If you want any evidence of genocide, that we didn't interview any family that had been spared. And while I was there, I met with the Egyptian foreign minister. They're adamant that they will not allow the Rafah crossing to be opened, but they do not control the Rafah crossing. Israel does, in violation of the Camp David Agreement. They believe that Israel will not carry out that step. I'm not as certain. Egypt has already withdrawn its ambassador from Israel. I think at that point, if that happened, they would probably sever relations with Israel, I suspect. But at the same time, I think, if Israel, especially given its actions now throughout the region, I don't think there's much to prevent Israel from attempting to breach the border and push them out, and the Egyptians be damned. But Egypt has been just categorical. This is unacceptable with many reasons. It would certainly uh, have major repercussions throughout the Arab world and domestically. I mean, I was in Jordan. I've been in the Middle East quite a bit since October 7th. So I was in Jordan last summer, studying, bringing back my Arabic for this book. I was in the West Bank. I've been twice to Qatar, flown to Qatar by Al Jazeera to do broadcasting for them. I've made 3 trips to Egypt. And the rage off the street, and understandable rage, is intense. And that rage is directed not only towards Israel and the United States, uh, but also toward the inability on the part of these Arab governments and regimes to respond in an effective way. I remember when I was in Egypt having dinner with the former Minister of Information for Gamal Abdel Nasser, who Sadat threw in prison for 10 years. And he said, it's not that Israel is strong. Israel has 10 million people. It's that the Arab countries with 480 million people are weak. And one wonders, if you went back to the days of Nasser and Nehru and Tito and the non-aligned movement, whether this genocide would even happen. I suspect it wouldn't. But these regimes have been so cowed, so broken, they're so obsequious, and they're just client regimes, largely to the United States, that they lack the capacity, the ability to essentially organize to push back against the genocide. In fact, the only country that's attempted to halt the genocide is Yemen, by disrupting the maritime traffic. And then you saw the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan create a land corridor. When I was in Jordan, truck after truck, I mean, long lines of trucks were going into Israel to deliver the kinds of consumer goods and vegetables and everything else that Israel could only now get through a land corridor. But if these governments and the courageous, she's of Palestinian descent, the courageous Jordanian journalist who exposed it and wrote about it, the King Abdullah, threw in prison for a year. So one last question. What is keeping Netanyahu from facing court prosecution? Many thanks for your relentless and much needed work. Thanks. What's keeping him from facing court prosecution? Well, I think the United States provides protective cover for Netanyahu and Gantz, who are, there are warrants out for their arrest. I mean, we have a guy who's, been labeled a war criminal or accused of being a war criminal come and address the U.S. Congress, and these Congress people can't leap to their feet fast enough to give him a standing ovation. Can the U.S., NATO, Israel axis of evil be defeated? It'll defeat itself. And imperial overreach is the death of all empires. Remember that what we've done over the last 2 decades has just been one debacle after another. The genocide has huge reverberations, especially throughout the global South. It has delivered a very clear message to the rest of the world, especially people who are of color, that humanitarian law doesn't matter. You don't matter. You are worthless. You can be erased from the face of the earth, and nobody's going to care. Especially countries, whether it's South Africa or India, where they have suffered colonial occupation. They and not only suffered colonial occupation, but of course their own Holocausts, which are shut out of the Western narrative. Whether that's in like the 1943 Bengal famine, where 3 million Hindus starved to death, and Prime Minister Churchill responded by calling them a beastly people with a beastly religion, or the genocides that took place in Namibia, or Armenian genocide. I mean, the Holocausts that were endured by African Americans, Native Americans here. The genocide is kind of built into the DNA of Western imperialism, and And I think the genocide in Gaza has driven home that point, especially as the climate breaks down. Um, and you have more and more climate refugees. That message is that what we have done to the Palestinians, stripped them of their rights. Because if you're trapped in Gaza, you can't leave, you can't work, you're stateless. Creating these vast and more climate refugees pour north. I think there's a clear understanding in the global South that what's being done to the Palestinians will as the world begins to break down, will be done to them. Why, Erica Rael, why is Bill Gates not sending food to Gaza? Well, Bill Gates is an immoral piece of shit. I mean, of course he's not going to send food to Gaza. Um, don't get fooled by Bill Gates. Years like fevers. I play with the idea that from the vantage of countries targeted by the West from the Cold War onward, World War III actually started sometime again. If this is naive, what more should I consider? Well, every time there's a conflagration like the conflict between Iran and Israel, then you've opened that Pandora's box. And having spent 20 years covering war, I learned that once that conflict starts, war controls you. You don't control it. And it has all sorts of ways of going bad, whether you're whatever your intentions are. So that's why, especially obviously, if you were an Iranian government official, what would you do now? You'd try and develop a bomb as fast as you could. I mean, that's the end result of this. Um, and if Iran develops a nuclear weapon, then Saudi Arabia will, and Egypt will, and Turkey will. I mean, they won't be far behind. So the whole attempt to limit or halt nuclear proliferation in the Middle East that'll probably be the end result of this thing. I mean, what happened when Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons program? Well, we know what happened to Gaddafi. What about when Saddam Hussein gave up his weapons of mass destruction, his chemical weapons program? We know what happened to Saddam Hussein. Well, that's not happened to the North Korean leadership because they have a nuclear weapon. That's the lesson that's going to be delivered to Iran and every other country that's a potential target. So I guess we have one or two more. Do you think that this is from Rosin Malone? Do you think that liberals sometimes end up facilitating fascism? Yeah, liberals always end up facilitating fascism because fascism is born of a bankrupt liberalism. And that is the subject of my book, Death of the Liberal Class. And what you do is you develop liberals who posture rhetorically about values they don't uphold. This is what's killed the Democratic Party. And the rage, legitimate rage towards the hypocrisy of liberals, sees a society turn on liberal values. That's what happened in the interwar years, or not interwar years, but after the death of Tito in 1980, before the war started, with a bankrupt liberalism in Yugoslavia. That's what happened in Weimar, and that's what's happened here. So you've seen the supposed values that liberals hold up: inclusiveness, plurality, become a target because liberals themselves have become so bankrupt by betraying the working class. I mean, remember, it was the Democratic Party under Clinton that pushed through NAFTA, the greatest betrayal of the working class since the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947, that deregulated the FCC, that destroyed welfare, and Biden was a full partner in this, and doubling the size of our prison population, throwing people into prison for life who'd never committed a nonviolent crime, militarizing our police force, ripping down the firewalls between investment and commercial banks, by destroying Glass-Steagall. This was all the Democrats. I mean, Clinton transformed the Democratic Party into the Republican Party, and he pushed the Republican Party so far to the right, it became an insane cult built around Donald Trump. Alejandro, what is the hope of our hopeless world in the absence of strong belief in religion? Thank you for using your voice to speak truth to power. What is a hopeless world in the absence of, I mean, you don't need to be, I come out of a religious tradition, but you don't need to come out of a religious tradition. Albert Camus did not. Many of the great resistance figures who I admire did not. It is about understanding that it's a moral imperative to fight back, whether we succeed or not. I'm in deep despair over the genocide. I don't see how it's going to be halted. I'm not going to go around and sell Pollyannish messages that, where Palestine will be free when it won't. And of course, I've lost friends and colleagues in Gaza, most of whom have just disappeared. We don't know what's happened to them. And yet there's a necessity to keep fighting back. I mean, for 14 years, I was fighting on behalf of Julian Assange, including flying to London to cover his court cases. I was one of 6 people invited to his wedding outside of Belmarsh prison. They wouldn't tell me a yes or a no, the prison authorities, and I just flew there anyway. They didn't allow any of us, the guests, to come in. And he's free. He's free largely because of massive mobilization in Australia and a government that finally heard it, and thank God. I mean, the greatest journalist of our generation. So we can't use the word hope if we don't resist, and yet we can't become discouraged if empirically we fail, or if empirically things get worse. What defines our integrity, our worth, is our action. And if we're in the right place, doing the right thing, and fighting against those forces that must be fought against, then the rest is, out of our hands. It's out of our control. We have to do the best we can to resist radical evil, with the full understanding that, if we look closely at human history, in most cases, radical evil wins. But what is it that gives a life meaning? What is it that gives a life purpose? And that I would fall back on the religious tradition that I come out of. It is standing unequivocally with the crucified of the earth, with a full understanding that if you stand with the crucified, you may very well be crucified yourself. And again, you don't need to come out of a religious tradition to embrace that belief system. I just happen to come out of one. So we can't worry about our success rate. We have to be very clear-eyed about what's happening around us. I mean, it rips my heart out to say what I say about Gaza, but as far as I can tell, that's where we are and where we're going. But we still have to keep standing up on behalf of the Palestinians. We have to stand up on behalf of these poor families in the United States who are being ripped apart by our version of the Gestapo ICE. That's what we're called to do. That gives our life worth. It gives us meaning. Maybe it doesn't bring, joy, but I think it brings a sense of self-fulfillment, which you won't get if you stand by and do nothing. Thanks for watching. Of course, you can find me on chrishedges.substack.com. I want to thank Sophia, who's sitting over there running this, and Max in LA, who have produced the Q&A and work on my shows. Thanks.